Hey, I'm Matt with JTRUK. Today we're going to walk through how to install your own JTRUK Cab kit. We'll go step by step as we convert this 2012 JKU to your very own JTRUK. We'll go through all the steps including prep and install. The JTRUK kit converts your 2007 to 2018 JKU 4-door Unlimited into an enclosed cab. You then have a variety of options of how you want to finish your JTRUK, whether that's with a truck bed or a flatbed like ours, or any other options you can dream up. We will have some other videos of different bed options coming in the future. Please make sure you watch this video in its entirety before starting on your project so you know what to expect and so you don't run into any issues. This 2012 JKU actually started off as a salvage build. Salvage Jeeps, especially ones with rear end damage, make a great candidate for JTRUK conversions because you're going to be cutting off and removing the back of the Jeep anyways. A note with this Jeep or any salvage Jeep you start a JTRUK build with, make sure the frame, doors, and everything is square and to spec before you start. If the frame or the body is not square or to spec, the cab back, roof panel, and the doors will not fit correctly. We took this Jeep to a frame shop and had them spec the body and the frame with lasers to ensure that the body was straight, square, and correct before we started this installation. The JTRUK kit was designed from the start to be a very easy and simple installation that can be done by the average Jeeper in his garage. You don't need to be a welder or know how to do body and paint work to complete the installation of this kit. The kit does not require you to cut your frame, fuel, brake lines, or electrical lines. In fact, for this installation of the cab kit, you will only need some basic tools: a complete set of metric and standard sockets, a wrench set including 18mm and 3/4 inch, a 4.5 inch grinder with cutoff wheel and abrasive flat wheel, a metal sawzall with a 10-inch long fine bimetal blade, a caulk gun, riv nut installation tool to set 3/8 inch brass nut certs, wire cutters and a crimp tool, regular and a Phillips screwdrivers, a cordless drill and or an impact driver, a utility knife, and 2 or 3 extra guys when you get ready to lift the back off of the body, and a few other small hand tools you probably already have in your garage. So follow along with us as we build this JTRUK. Again, this is just for the cab kit.
The first thing you'll need to do is prep your vehicle by removing your factory top. You'll also need to remove your doors, any rock rails or side steps, your spare tire, and if you have a towing package, you'll need to remove your trailer wire connection. Now you'll want to remove your front and rear seats. Next, you'll need to remove your rear seat belts, rear passenger and cargo carpets, and remove the subwoofer and or plastic trim from the rear wheel well. Unbolt and remove the sound bar. Now remove the roll bar padding and hard foam. Also remove the rear dome light and plastic mount and save them for later.
You want to make sure you save this rear plastic dome light surround piece. It does get reused up on the front right here when we remount the factory dome light.
Now you'll need to remove your wiring harness from the roll bar.
One quick tip: while you're disassembling the wiring harness and pulling it back forward, make sure you label each connector: dome light, rear wiper, tail lights, stop tail turn, license plate holders.
Once you're done removing and labeling the wiring, it's time to mark and remove the upper triangle plates from the main roll bar.
The satellite connector, you want to make sure you save that. Your satellite antenna, make sure you don't clip the wires of the antenna, just unplug it. We are going to have to relocate it slightly forward of where it's at once we take this plate off, but make sure you save it and do not damage the connector.
Using tape, create a line flush with the back of the roll bar. This will be your cut line for later. You can also make that line with a Sharpie. Once you've marked the triangle plate, you can remove it from the roll bar. Repeat this process on both sides.
One other little tip: make sure you put the bolts, whatever you are going to use, back into the holes so that you don't lose them.
When removing the tailgate air bellow vent, it may be dry rotted or in poor condition. If it is in poor condition, you can either replace it with a new JK one, or we like to replace them with TJ or LJ vents, which we'll show later. Next, remove the taillights, license plate mount, third brake light, and power lock connection from the tailgate. Make sure to label each of these plugs as you go. Now you can remove the complete and labeled wiring harness from the tailgate to the passenger front door. You'll repeat this process for the driver's side rear harness, though there won't be as many plugs for this side. You'll want to remove the plastic trim piece covering the seatbelt. Now we need to separate out each plug from the wiring harness by removing the tape and zip ties that hold it together. Head over to the soundbar you removed earlier and drill out the plastic rivets to start removing the soundbar wiring harness. Then remove the speakers and then remove the wiring harness. Next, we need to mark cut holes into the JTRUK cab for your speakers. You can either mount your factory speakers that you removed, or this is a great time to upgrade to 6x9s. If you're going to use your old speakers, measure the holes in your old soundbar. If you're going to use new speakers, make sure to use their included template. Using an 1.5" hole saw, drill a hole in the inside for the factory soundbar plug. Depending on the year of your JK, the hole might need to be slightly enlarged to fit the plug. Now we need to mark, measure, and cut the hole in the JTRUK cab for the vent bellow. You'll want to measure from the inside of the cab, centered in the inset between the speaker pods. It's best to drill the pilot holes from the inside first to mark your dimensions. You can either use the JK tailgate vent you removed earlier, or we actually prefer using a TJ or LJ vent. They are different sizes, so it's good to know which one you're going to use before you cut. We recommend cutting these openings with an air saw. Once your holes are cut, you need to test fit the rear window and make sure you have a 5/16 gap around the window of the frame into the opening of the cab back for proper fit of the window gasket. Now you can set the JTRUK cab aside, because ideally you'll want to test fit the cab before sending it off to paint. Back to the Jeep. Using an oscillating blade tool, remove the sound and heat insulation material from the rear floor footwells. Now you'll need to remove the JK body mount bolts. You may need to remove the rear bumper to get access to the bolts, but you'll eventually need to remove the rear bumper no matter what, so now is as good a time as any. Once that's finished, you can make your cut line by running a line of tape along the floor. Line up the front side of the tape with the valley of the pinch weld seam, so that you can cut along the rear of the tape into the valley of the seam. This should be a straight line from the forward of the pinch weld seam on one side to the pinch weld seam on the other. Make sure the tape line wraps around the rockers as well. Just know that while you'll want to be as accurate as possible with this cut line, there is some room for forgiveness when you go to install the cab back. Now it's time to cut the roll bar tubing flush with the main hoop, the bar that goes left to right above the front seats. This cut is most easily done with a portaband, but you can also cut it with a Sawzall or cut wheel. Make sure to start recording video for Instagram and TikTok now.
All right, now that we're ready to actually cut the back of the body off, a couple things to note. When you cut on the floor, you want to make sure your cut is very shallow and not going down further into the frame or through the body very deeply. There are fuel lines and brake lines and electrical that are fairly shallow next to the body that you want to make sure that you're not cutting into when you make your cut mark across the floor. So we'll go through those just to make sure the areas that you want to cut really shallow.
Cut the floor footwell along the rear of the tape line using a 4.5" cut wheel. Be sure not to cut too deep or you'll cut into the fuel line and brake lines under the body. You will need to use a Sawzall with a long 10-inch bimetal blade to cut all the way through the side rockers.
Alright, now that we've got the body completely cut away from the front section of the Jeep, the only thing left that's connected on the back section of the Jeep is the fuel filler neck and the vapor return line. So what we found, and why we haven't even touched those yet, is we don't want open vapor lines while we're cutting or doing anything else. So we've left those connected. What we're going to do now is disconnect them underneath the Jeep at the normal factory disconnect points, and then we're going to pull the body back off. As soon as we take those off, we're going to fill those with tape them shut, so we're not getting fuel vapor lines in the shop or wherever you're working. But you want to make sure that you do this at this step, not prior to, so that you don't have fuel vapor coming out in the shop.
Remove the e-brake cable bolt from under the tub and disconnect the fuel filler neck lines and vent lines. You'll want to tape over these lines to prevent hazardous fumes from escaping. By tempting a buddy with pizza or beer, remove the rear half of the Jeep body and post it to social media to get Insta-famous. This is also an excellent time to clean up and paint any areas of the chassis that may need touching up. Now remove the plastic fuel filler neck and vent lines from the back half of the JK body. And then reinstall them onto the chassis fuel and vent lines that we taped over previously. Now you'll want to paint the floor of the cab where we made the cut to protect it from rust. Reroute the portion of the rear harness containing the third brake light and rear dome light plug up the B pillar to the center of the cage where both of these will plug in. Now we're going to talk about the passenger side wiring harness that will need to be loomed or grouped together based on their routing destination. In previous steps, that harness was separated into 5 plugs. Those 5 plugs are the stop tail turn light, power tailgate lock, third brake light, the rear dome light, and the subwoofer and 12-volt share the 5th plug. There is a ground wire that is shared between the stop tail turn plug and the other plugs that will need to be modified. Because the stop tail turn is routed along the frame rail and separated from the other plugs, we'll need to create a longer ground wire that will run from the stop tail turn plug back to the original location of the ground wire split.
So this is the tailgate lock third brake light harness, and this is the ground wire that I have cut away from the tail light harness. So what you need to do is take where you cut and trace that ground wire back down the harness till you get back up here to where it goes into the cab. And then from there, you will take your extra wire and a quick splice and once you have that installed, you will run your extra wire back down the tailgate harness, tail light harness here, until it meets up with the piece of wire that you cut, and then you will attach them together. That should complete the taillight harness.
Once you've completed the taillight harness, protect it with loom and store it in the cab for later. Once that's completed, you can remount the dome light on the center cage using the rear dome light plastic trim piece we removed earlier. Trim the plastic off the housing so the dome light will fit correctly on the trim piece. Remove the center metal clip from the soundbar and transfer it to the new trim piece. It will rest there until the screw holds it in place. Run the dome light harness up through the passenger side B-pillar to connect to the dome light. Center the dome light housing on the roll bar. Mark your screw locations and use self-tapping screws to mount the dome light plastic trim housing to the roll bar. Now it's time to use a cutoff wheel to trim the triangular overhead cage plates we marked earlier. Be sure to mark and drill holes for the satellite antenna so that the underside mounting bolts fit into the rectangular recess that is already present on the cage. We recommend painting these brackets now that you have raw metal exposed from the cuts. Reinstall the brackets and mount the satellite unit. Cut the vertical metal divider inside the wall of the rocker on each side of the vehicle to allow the cab back to slide into place. You will probably need to bend this divider forward out of the way.
All right, now we're almost ready to put the cab back directly onto the B-pillar. There's a couple small little slits in the floor and the rocker that we have to make for the cab back to fit up to the B-pillar.
Make 2 1/4-inch slits approximately 1/4 inch wide and 1 1/4 inches deep. You may need to adjust these based on your fitment. Next, we'll make another relief cut on each side that is 2 inches down from the floor and 1 1/4 inches deep, and then another that is flush with the bottom of the floor. You can use the other relief cuts as a guide. Once you have this cut, you can bend the metal back and out of the way. We recommend using black primer or touch-up paint to protect the raw metal edges of the cuts from rust. Now it's time to recruit your pizza buddy to help you dry fit the cab onto the back of the Jeep. The floor of the cab will rest on the floor of the Jeep. We recommend installing the floor first and rotating the top up against the B-pillar. If the cab doesn't fit snugly, check your slit cuts in the rocker and adjust your cuts accordingly. Once the cab is snug against the B-pillar, it is time to test fit the mounting bolts onto the original door hinge locations. Due to varying factory manufacturing tolerances, the pre-drilled holes in the cab back may need to be enlarged to align slightly with the rear door hinge bolt locations. Due to access restrictions and limited visibility, using a cell phone camera can make this job easier. Once these bolts are in place, you can mark the additional bolt hole locations to install supplied nutserts. These additional bolt locations provide added strength and support. Now we can test fit the fiberglass trim corners to the cab back and mark a cut line at the factory seam underneath the door. This will be a visible cut, so make sure it's as clean as possible. You can now remove the cab back and send it off to paint. Drill holes in the marked location on the B-pillar and install nutserts. Use a single layer of gray foam along the edge of the B-pillar to help seal the cab back to the B-pillar. You may want to cut a hole over the nut certs to make it easier to install the finished cab back later. On the painted cab back, install the speakers and speaker wiring harness. Now it's time to install the window, making sure that the butt end of the gasket is centered on the bottom of the window with the locking part of the gasket facing forward. If you need more information on how to install a single locking gasket onto a truck slider window, there are additional resources linked in the description. You're almost finished. Now it's time to lay a bead of body seam sealer on the floor and on the B-pillar to seal the cab back onto the Jeep. Tempt your buddy with more beer to get him to help you mount your cab back for the final time. Once the cab back is in place, install bolts into the hinge bolt holes and newly installed nut certs to install the cab back to the B-pillar, ensuring that it's tight against the B-pillar and the body lines are consistent. Install the tailgate bellow vent for the final time using screws and adhesive. Next, you'll install the double bulb rubber gasket. Make sure to trim and route the gasket around the corners. Next, you'll want to trim the roll bar padding. Start your cut on the padding right before the cutout for the door surrounds and make a cut straight up to the zipper, but do not cut the zipper. Then cut the padding along the zipper, leaving it intact. Then come back to your original cut and cut along the opposite zipper. This will allow you to zip the zipper closed and tuck it in, giving it a more finished look. Take the trimmed roll bar padding and feed it between the cage and the cab back. Zip the padding closed, fold it forward, and tuck it into itself. Installing the modified roll bar padding can be done after the cab back is installed, but it is much easier to accomplish before the cab back is installed due to access. Then, tuck it into the side roll bar padding piece. Repeat this process on the driver's side. Now you'll install a single layer of foam across the front of the inside of the JTRUK roof panel. You can now install the roof of the cab using the threaded hand knobs. Align the center latch and mark holes to the Jeep center hook. Then use self-tapping sheet metal screws to mount the latch. You may need to adjust the tension in all three latches by threading the J-hook in and out for proper fit. Now it's time to plug in the brake light and trim the rear floor carpet to fit the floor of the JTRUK cab.
All right, next we're going to trim up the rear section floor carpet so that it fits on in the back part of the cab underneath the rear seats. So we're going to find a reference point, which is right here, of where the carpet starts to roll up, so we can cut it on the other piece outside. So if we look, we're at about 7 inches to where it starts to roll up. So that same spot on the carpet is about right here. So we're going to come 7 inches back from there and cut all the way across.
Next, drill a hole directly above the frame rails on both sides of the Jeep for the brake light wiring harness. These holes should be 1.5 inches in size. These holes need to be drilled below the speaker pods on the inside of the cab, so be sure to measure twice and drill once to make sure they don't interfere with the speaker pods on the inside of the cab. Pass the harness for the taillights and license plate light through the cab back. You can reuse the factory rubber grommet from above the taillight if you reverse it, but you'll also need to make a slight cut to fit it over the plug. Once you've remounted the grommet, you can zip tie the wire harness in place. Now you can reconnect the factory soundbar plug back into the cab back speakers. Now you're ready to install the corner trim panels onto the cab back. Test fit the panel to the body. Use a dry erase marker to mark the surface area under the panel that will need to be sanded and prepped for adhesive. Use painter's tape to mask off the area to prevent accidental damage to the painted area. Use 80 grit sandpaper to scuff the surface area that will be under the panel and wipe it clean with acetone. Using the supplied adhesive, apply adhesive to the back corner panel. Use enough adhesive that you'll get good coverage and adhesion, but do not use so much that it will leak out from the sides. Firmly press the corners to the cab back. The epoxy has a 10-minute activation time, so you may need another set of hands or clamps to keep the panel secure to the body until the adhesive has fully cured. Once the adhesive has fully cured, you can optionally apply a thin line of body seam sealer where the corner panel meets the JTRUK.
Congratulations on building your very own JTRUK. Now your final step is just to install your front seats and make your bed selection, whether that be a step side, fleet side, or a flat bed to make it truly your own. Depending on which bed option you go with determines the best method for reattaching the fuel filler neck, the e-brake cables, and the electrical brake connections. As a side note to the installation, it is best practice to dry fit all of the automotive parts prior to sending them to the paint shop. That's the one nice thing about the JTRUK project is you don't have to send the whole Jeep to the paint shop. We hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, reach out to us at GR8TOPS.com.